Greetings viewers, welcome to today's tutorial. I promise it will be exceptional. Now, I'll be teaching biology. Topic: cell. Its living units and their structures. Now, this topic is mainly for students who wants to write biology in JAMB, WAEC and NECO. Now, in this topic, we are going to be treating the definition of cells, the unicellular and the multicellular organisms. We are also going to look at cells as parts of a multicellular organisms. We are also going to look at the cell theory. Then we now look at the cell structures and functions. Now, let us first define what cells are. Cells are actually basic units of living organism where living characteristics, but they also have living characteristics like reproduction, nutrition, excretion, irritability, growth, and others. So, cells are basic units of living organisms and they carry out normal life processes. Now, this is the definition of cell. Now, let's treat or look at what unicellular organisms are. Now, unicellular organisms, they are those organisms that has one cell. So they're also known as one-celled organism. Now, let's go deeper into this unicellular organism. Now, in these unicellular organisms, we have plants-like unicellular organism, and they also have animal-like unicellular organisms. Now, in these plants-like unicellular organism, the only plants-like unicellular organism we have is actually the Chlamydomonas. Now, these Chlamydomonas, they are plant-like unicellular organisms that possess chloroplasts. So this adaptive feature of having the chloroplast made it to be autotrophs. That means they can actually synthesize their own food by themselves. So Chlamydomonas are autotrophs. Now, Chlamydomonas makes use of flagella for movement, and it also makes use of contractile vacuole to get rid of or to remove excess water that enters into the cell through the surroundings. Now, these Chlamydomonas, they can reproduce by both sexual and asexual method. Now, this is all about the plant-like unicellular organisms. Now, let's go over to the animal-like unicellular organism. Now, these animal-like unicellular organisms, we first of all look at the amoeba. The amoeba is the simplest unicellular organism that are heterotrophs. That means it cannot actually synthesize its own food. So it has the gullet for taking in food. It has what we call gullet for taking in food, and also has what we call the food vacuole, where the food digests into. So now, since these amoeba are heterotrophs, so we will now say, we also say that amoeba makes use of pseudopodia for movement, and it also makes use of contractile vacuole to get rid of excess water that enters into the cell through the surroundings. Now, we will look at another animal-like unicellular organism, which is the paramecium. Now, the paramecium is also a simple unicellular organism. It's a simple unicellular organism that the body walls is more complex than the amoeba. So the body walls of the paramecium is more complex than the amoeba. Now, this paramecium makes use of cilia for movement, and also makes use of this contractile vacuole to get rid of excess water that enters the cell through the surroundings. So the main function of this contractile vacuole is to get or to excrete water that enters through the cell. And we are now going to look at a living a cell which is called the euglena. This euglena has both plant-like and animal-like characteristics, because euglena has chloroplasts for synthesizing food and also has gullets for taking in food. So it's both plant-like and animal-like unicellular organism. So we are done with unicellular organisms. Now let's go over to the multicellular organisms. Now, these multicellular organisms, we have the colonial and we have the filamentous. Now, this, when we talk about the colonial, we're actually talking about volvox, and filamentous, we are talking about things like Spirogyra, Hydra, sponges, and protozoas. Now, we are going to be basically discussing about Spirogyra and Hydra. Now, in colonial, in volvox as a colony, these volvox are made up of chlamydomonas cells. So it has chlamydomonas cells that are connected, or that are linked by what we call the cytoplasmic strands. Now, if we now look at the filamentous Spirogyra, where we have the Spirogyra and the Hydra. Now, these hydras, they have tissues such that the outer layer of their tissues is called the ectoderm. While the inner layer is called the endoderm. While the middle layer of their tissue is called the mesoglia. The outer layer, the ectoderm; the inner layer, the endoderm; and the middle layer, the mesoglia. Now, we will now look at cells as part of multicellular organism. Cells as part of multicellular organisms. In this one, we are going to be talking about cells in higher animals. Here we have the tissues, the organs, and the systems. Now, human beings have animals have 5 types of tissues. First one, we will talk about the surface tissues. These surface tissues, the function is to protect the inner body. In animals, we call this surface tissue the epithelial tissues. While in plants, we call it the dermal tissue. Now, the second type of tissue is the connective, the supportive, and the packed tissue. Now, this tissue connects or bind other tissues together and supports them. Now, the third one is the vascular tissues. These tissues is actually meant for transportation of materials around the body. Examples, we have the xylem and the phloem in plants, and in animals we have blood or the blood vessels. And we also have the muscular tissues. These tissues actually bring about movements. And we also have the nervous tissues. These tissues are present in animals. They receive stimuli and transmit impulses to various parts of the body. Now, we are going to go over to cell theory. The cell theory. Now, cell theory is just all about the postulates many scientists have actually brought about cells. Now, the first man to discover cell was Robert Hooke. In the year 1665. Now, he was the first man that discovered cell. Then in the year 1839, Matthias Kellerden and Theodor Schwann, they actually stated something, that bodies of both plants and animals are made up of cells and the product of cells. So in the year 1839, Matthias Kellerden and Theodor Schwann stated that bodies of both plants and animals are made up of cells and products of cells. And in the year 1855, Rudolf Virchow, he stated that all cells come from cells. All cells comes from cells. So I'll now be stating the 4 cell theory we have. Now, the first one is that all living organisms are composed of one or more cells. That all living organisms are composed of one or more cells. The second theory is that the cell is the structural and the functional unit of living organisms. The cell is the structural and functional unit of all living organisms. 3. That all existing cells are formed or reproduced from the pre-existing cells. That all existing cells are reproduced from the pre-existing cells. And then the last one, that cells contains information for their structural and functional development in its nucleus in its nucleic acid. So a cell contains information in the nucleic acid for its structural and functional development. These are the cell theory. Now, finally, we will now be looking at the cell structure. The cell structure and function. Now, every cell is made up of what we call a protoplasm. And this protoplasm is the living material of a cell. And this protoplasm is enclosed by a membrane called the plasma membrane. The plasma membrane. Called the plasma membrane. Now, but in plants also have cell wall. Now, this protoplasm is now divided into two: the cytoplasm and the nucleus. Now, this cytoplasm contains all the major organelles of the cell. Then, while the nucleus is mainly for storing hereditary information and genetics. So, in this cytoplasm, where we have the mitochondria is a site in the cell for energy creation, where energy is being formed. So it is the powerhouse of the cell. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. While we also have the ribosomes. The ribosomes is also the site for protein synthesis. We also have what we call the chloroplast. The chloroplast is the site for photosynthesis. We also have the endoplasmic reticulum. The endoplasmic reticulum is designed to transport materials. So we have two types of endoplasmic reticulum. We have the rough endoplasmic reticulum and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Now, the rough endoplasmic reticulum is the one that attaches the ribosome to it. So it transports the proteins around the cell body. So this is where we will end this class. Our next topic, we will now be looking at cell, the properties and the functions. Thank you, and please do not forget to subscribe to this channel, or you search for online biology and parasitology tutorial. Thank you, and see you in the next class.